Death and Rebirth. Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to today's report. Today's report was sent in by C-Dog, where he took LSD and an unknown benzodiazepine. And here's the full report details. Alright, we got quite an acid trip today. This one marked by a ton of ego loss and an unfolding of events that really don't turn out too well. C-Dog trips with some homies during the summer, which was nothing new for him at this point. But for whatever reason, this tab just hit him way harder, and he seems to have gotten overwhelmed with psychedelia. It gets to a point where he's unresponsive with his friends, and later even starts acting out crazy because he thought he was dreaming. I'll just say that the police do end up getting involved. This is a really good report, and shows that even with experience, you never know exactly what might be in store with psychedelics. I'm sure you'll enjoy this one, so without further ado, let's dive right into this. This trip took place in early August of 2019 on one of the hottest days of a Texas summer, which will go down as one of the worst and most influential days of my life. I had done acid about 8 times prior to this, all at normal doses, along with being a regular weed smoker. Throughout the summer, my friends and I had yet to have a chance to hang out together, and this was the first time in months that we had all been in each other's presence. Among them, names changed for privacy, were Joe and Eric, who I had tripped with several times before, as well as Alex and Missio, who were much less experienced with acid than us. We were each going to take a tab, 100 to 150 micrograms, which was nothing out of the ordinary for me. We all met up at Missio's house in the 112-degree weather, with his mom home. Terrible idea. We took the acid around 5 p.m. to beat some of the heat, but avoid staying up until the crack of dawn. Within 5 to 10 minutes, I began to feel it. This may have been a sign that it was a different chemical than what my friends had taken, but I doubt it because drugs always seemed to hit my system much earlier than anyone else. I remember going in the bathroom to piss and looking in the mirror thinking that tonight was going to be amazing. Boy, was I wrong. After waiting for my dumbass friends to get ready, we headed for the pool located a couple blocks from Missio's house. The combination of the unbearable heat and the already saturated trees amplified the acid, causing me to trip harder and faster. At this point, I was feeling really good and was still excited to spend the day tripping with my friends. However, once we got to the pool, that changed. There were kids and adults everywhere, making me feel very self-conscious. The geography of the park was also very unsettling, as there were busy streets and houses encircling it, and the isolation from me being the only one tripping amplified that. My friends helped me out, but once the acid kicked in for them, they were unable to reassure me much. Joe and Eric stayed with me at the playground, while Alex and Missio went to go swim. At this point, I was very visually impaired, and I kept thinking that I had lost my phone despite having left it at the house. Overall, I was just being difficult and acting strangely. After 30 minutes or so, we got too hot and returned back to the house. My last concrete memory is me picking up a traffic cone off the street and carrying it around, while making eyes at a girl across the street. Real crackhead shit. After we got back home, everything I remember is sort of a slideshow and in rough chronological order, since I basically blacked out. We were in Missio's room just chilling and discussing how the acid was making us feel, when I just began to repeatedly scream, "What? What? What?" at my friends. This obviously startled them, as I was not really responding to anything they said. My friends were definitely concerned, but at this point, I had lost all attachment to reality. I had no idea why this happened, and to this day, it remains a mystery why I became so delusional. After screaming at my friends and laughing hysterically for no reason, they decided to leave me by myself so that I could calm down, and went outside. This was somewhat of a good idea, as I began to halfway nap and recede into my own mind. Once I was alone, shit really got crazy. I would try my best to explain what was going on in my mind, but even I am not totally sure what I was thinking. The idea of having taken a drug was still somewhat in my head, but I thought that I had overdosed on some sort of prescription medication. The visualization wormed itself into my mind, where I was at the bottom of a pit in my unconscious and my friends were trying to help me out. In order to get me out of this pit, which I thought was death, my friends had to solve a puzzle over and over again for each pill I had taken. The puzzle was to get me to say the phrase, "I have taken a drug multiple times," and this had to be repeated 195 times, which was the supposed amount of pills I had taken. To this day, when the number 195 comes up in my life, I get flashbacks to this trip. I think that my friends were around me when I got this idea, because their voices were too real to have been hallucinated. This process, while completely fictional, took what seemed like a lifetime to complete, and it had to be repeated a whole 195 times. So, eventually, I gave up and just accepted death. This acceptance marked the next stage of my delusion, which I will call Rebirth. Basically, I had all my knowledge reset and had to work up from nothingness back up to my current existence. Because of time dilation, this seemed to take an infinite amount of time, and I learned a lot of forbidden knowledge that was immediately forgotten. In this rebirth, I began with nothing, and eventually learned about the first dimension, space, quarks, math, etc. These were just loose concepts, and I eventually developed a cosmic language to describe them. I then worked my way up to the second dimension, where shapes and letters would float around in my head, coming together to create things of the people and things I once knew. At a certain point, I was blasted into the third dimension, and finally woke up and became aware of my surroundings. It is worth mentioning that I was not entirely unconscious during this whole time, and I would occasionally sit up and look around, just to lie back down and return to the madness. After seeing everything in my surroundings, I proceeded to the fourth dimension, where I had to go through the phases of my life to reach the current day. The best comparison of my thought processes would be a dream, as everything made sense at the time, but my thoughts were actually just random, unrelated nonsense. After I reached my present day self, I felt much more aware and began to feel more conscious. At this point, it had been a few hours since I took the acid, so my peak was beginning to decrease slightly. I had an intense sense of self-realization and was thoroughly aware of each and every part of my personality. I got up, saw my friends outside in the backyard, and decided to finally join them. In the back of my mind, I was reminded of the pit and my death, so I began to think I was in some sort of afterlife. I walked around, not hearing or responding to anything my friends said. I was just present. After some unknown but short amount of time, I just completely lost it for no reason. I think that the lack of responsibilities from being in such a dreamlike state allowed me to do whatever I wanted. So I ran back into the house with no warning, and made a dash for the front door. However, I had no plan and really just wanted to do whatever I wanted, so I just stood there and waited for my friends to catch up to me. Thinking I was going to run into traffic, Eric, who was much bigger than me, tackled me to the floor and held me there. I think that this is when I pissed my pants, because I did at some point, and the sheer adrenaline of the moment likely would have caused such a thing. Missy O's mom immediately called the cops, and they arrived quickly. I think that Eric held me on the floor the whole time, but I'm not certain. The funniest part of the whole ordeal was when a cop asked me to sit in a chair, and I stared him straight in the face and knocked over a flower pot. They promptly handcuffed me to a chair and injected me with a benzodiazepine to knock me out. This was the part of the trip I remember most, and while I was still very confused, I likely would have come down on my own in the next hour or so. I remember actually hearing the words people were saying, and recognizing people's faces and emotions. I remember floating to the ambulance and being loaded in, but falling asleep right after. If this experience was bad for anybody at the time, it was everybody except for me. I was completely unaware of what was going on. It was just acting as if I were in a dream. However, my friends were completely exposed and later interrogated by all of the parents. My mom was terrified and devastated, and my girlfriend at the time was heartbroken. On top of that, we had completely disrespected and scared Missy O's mom, which I regret to this day. This event has permanently damaged my relationships with my best friend's parents, and most of them still don't trust me. While there were many, many downsides to this experience, it has caused some of the most change in myself out of anything I have ever done. For one, it had marked the end of my somewhat destructive, druggy phase, where I thought it was cool to be addicted to drugs. While I still smoke pot and drink with my friends, I find drugs far less glamorous and am much smarter when using them. If I could tell anyone to learn anything from this story, it's to never have parents around when tripping, but rather a reliable trip sitter. If I had had a sober friend taking care of me and preventing anything bad from happening, I would have avoided the cops and an unnecessary $5,000 hospital bill. That being said, when someone is genuinely in danger, one should never hesitate to call an ambulance. But anyone experienced with acid could have been able to tell that I was simply having a bad trip and not at any risk of overdosing. The trip was definitely a landmark on my life, and I consider it to be a death and rebirth of myself.